Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of If I'm Being Honest. In This Be the Verse by Philip Larkin, he says the following: They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They might not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and then add some extra just for you. And if you're hearing that for the first time, you're probably thinking, God, that's a little bit harsh, isn't it? I thought the same thing before. But the older I get, the less harsh it sounds and the more honest it sounds. Because I think one of the strangest parts of growing up is realizing that your parents are just people. They're not heroes, they're not villains, but literally just people. They're flawed, they're traumatized, they're trying and they're failing, and they're bleeding onto others while pretending that them themselves aren't hurt. And I think there's a specific kind of grief that comes with that realization. Because I think when you're a child, your parents are your entire world. They are your safety, they're your truth, and they're your God. And then one day you grow up enough to see them clearly. And growing up and seeing your parents' flaws is like losing your religion. I think when you're younger, you don't question your parents, you kind of just absorb them. The way they speak becomes your inner voice. The way they love becomes your definition of love. The way they handle anger, conflict, silence, it becomes your blueprint for surviving. And nobody prepares you or tells you that before you even have a personality, you inherit someone else's fears. You inherit the way your mother apologizes too much or how your father shuts down instead of communicating. And you inherit the anxiety, the avoidance, the anger, maybe, and the emotional distance. And sometimes I think you spend your entire adult life trying to separate yourself from things that never even belonged to you in the first place. And that's the craziest part, I think, because some of our deepest wounds aren't personal, they're inherited. And I think every child has that moment where the illusion breaks. Maybe it's hearing your parents argue through a wall. Maybe it's realizing your mother can be mean. And maybe it's understanding that your father wasn't emotionally available because he didn't love you, but because nobody taught him how. And suddenly, the people who once felt so infinite suddenly become painfully small. And that realization is devastating because children don't just love their parents, they worship their parents. So, what happens when your gods disappoint you? What happens when the people who taught you what love was are the reason you have to spend your adulthood unlearning it? And I think that's why adulthood feels so disorientating sometimes as well, because you start noticing the ways your childhood still lives in you. The way you panic when someone gets angry, or how you apologize for simply existing. The way affection can feel a little bit uncomfortable, and the way you expect abandonment before people even get the chance to leave you. And then comes the uncomfortable truth. Your parents probably didn't wake up trying to damage you. They were just parenting from their own survival mode. And I think that somehow makes it worse because it would almost be a little bit easier if they were monsters, if they were cruel people. But most parents aren't monsters. They're wounded people trying to heal parts of themselves. And I think it's one of the hardest transitions into adulthood. It's grieving the parents you thought you had while learning to love the parents you actually have. Because at some point you stop asking, why did they do this to me? And you start asking what happened to them before you got here. And I think that question changes everything because you start seeing your mother as someone's daughter, and you start seeing your father as a scared little boy trapped inside a grown man. You realize that they also had dreams before survival swallowed them whole. And then suddenly the anger you feel towards them becomes a little bit more complicated because now there's empathy, now there's contact, and now there's grief involved. But understanding someone else's pain does not erase the pain that they passed on to you. And I think people struggle a little bit with that. And I know I have as well in the past. We think forgiveness means pretending something didn't hurt, but it doesn't. You can love your parents deeply and still admit that they wounded you. Both things can exist at the same time. And I think one of the quietest fears that people carry with them is the fear of becoming their parents. You hear your mother come out of your mouth one day and it terrifies you, or you react the way your dad would have, and suddenly it becomes clear how cycles tend to repeat themselves. because healing isn't automatic and self-awareness doesn't magically erase conditioning. And if you don't confront what hurt you, you will eventually hurt someone else. That's how generational trauma survives. Not through being evil or trying to be evil, but through unconsciousness. Through people who never stop long enough to ask, why am I like this? Maybe that's where the healing starts. Maybe healing starts with looking at your parents honestly without turning them into saints or demons. Maybe it's accepting that they loved you in the ways that they knew how, even if those ways were a little bit complicated. And maybe maturity is realizing that your parents are having their first go at life the same way that you are as well. I don't think growing up is about becoming less emotional. I think it's becoming honest about where those emotions come from. It's recognizing that some of the voices in your head never belonged to you in the first place. It's choosing what gets to continue through you and what finally ends with you. Because maybe our parents did mess us up. Maybe they gave us their fears, their coping mechanisms, their unresolved pain. But maybe healing is refusing to make that someone else's inheritance. Maybe the most loving thing we can do is to become more aware, to stop the wound instead of passing it down. And maybe that's what adulthood really is. Not realizing your parents were perfect, but realizing they were human the entire time. And see you guys next week.